Good morning, sir. For the record, my name is Brendan Miller. I'm counsel to Freedom Corp, which is an entity that represents the protesters that were in your city in January and February of 2022.
Can you just speak up a bit, please?
And first, thank you for your service, and I'm sorry for all the things you've had to go through since everything that's happened to you. It doesn't seem fair to me. But I just want to get into asking you some questions about some of the things you gave evidence about. I've read the transcript, though I wasn't here on Friday. But you described the issue with respect to the protesters as assaultive behavior. And I just want to clarify, by that I take it you don't mean actual physical assaults under the criminal code, do you?
Two things. Thank you for your questions. Two things. And I may have been guilty of it myself in chief. The pejorative term, the protesters, the convoy, it's not accurate. There were an amorphous group of individuals, collectives, convoys that in totality could be described as the protesters, the occupiers, but they were by no means unified in their mind or their intentions or their actions. Secondly, yes, I use the term assaultive in the broadest case possible, broadest way possible. It is my understanding that there was criminal code assaultive behavior by individuals in and around the protest areas of the city, but I can't tell you that they were specifically a part of one convoy or specifically a part of some group that had clearly established themselves as a major, if not a dominant factor. But there was criminal code level assaultive, threatening behavior that became the subject of criminal investigations. I don't know the status of those investigations.
Okay. And it's fair to say, though, that though the OPS wasn't enforcing things for broken windows or anything like that, that, of course, if there was a physical assault in downtown Ottawa, no matter that the protesters were there, that incident would be investigated and charges would be laid where appropriate, right?
Yes, sir. That would be my understanding.
Nobody from the OPS held off and wasn't enforcing the criminal code. They still were doing it in full force and effect. Is that fair?
They were, with the caveat again that officers had maximum discretion to assess whether or not, A, there was a need to make an actual arrest, B, whether or not that arrest would cause an escalation in public safety issues for the public, for those participating in demonstration, including the officers and other members themselves. But there was an expectation that they would still capture the evidence necessary and, if possible, pursue charges by law, provincial, or criminal federal statute at a later appropriate time.
Right. And would it surprise you to know, it's already in evidence, that in the time period between the start of the protest and when the invocation of the Emergencies Act came about, there was a total of 5 charges for assault in total?
I don't know the statistics, sir.
Thank you. So the second thing I want to talk to you about is the barricades that went up when the protest arrived, and I just want to get some clarification on that from you. I understand that the city put up the cement barricades, or whatever, they have a term for the type of barricade, but they put up the cement barricades where the vehicles were parked basically in the first few days, and that those barricades essentially would prevent any other vehicles from getting into where they were parked on the roadways or from leaving. Is that fair?
Again, my understanding is there may have been cement barricades used to close or redirect traffic routes even in advance of the convoys coming in. Certainly, I think as a general statement, once the quote-unquote red zones were established, that those red zones were largely demarked by barricades. I believe in the first weekend, there was a combination of different types of barricade usage, including the use of city-owned vehicles at some locations. And there were points along the red zone where there might have been a police vehicle and police officers either alone or in combination with a variety of barriers and barricades.
Right, because this commission has already heard some evidence, and even from the incident response group reports, that individual protesters with vehicles were wanting to leave but couldn't because they were barricaded in. Did you hear about that?
I don't recall the specifics. I do know that there were, on two levels, it would have been difficult to navigate through what had been established after the first weekend, and that would require some level of communication and assistance. But that there were several occasions throughout my tenure as chief of police where I was made aware that people wanting to leave within those zones were able to leave with some facilitation by the officers.
Because I understand that they weren't, and there's going to be evidence from our clients that that was a problem. They would ask to leave and they wouldn't remove the barricades. Did you hear anything about that?
Nothing specifically, but I could understand that there would be challenges in doing just that, logistical challenges. But I do recall specifically being told of a number of trucks, small vehicles, or individuals that were able to indicated they wanted to leave and then were able to, through logistics, to facilitate their departure. Small numbers is what my recollection is, but there were instances.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. And already in evidence is that on January 30th, 2022, you requested of Stephen Kay at the City of Ottawa to obtain an injunction, and you recall asking for that. Is that right?
Can you just give me the date again, sir?
January 30th, 2022. It was a phone call and then a follow-up email.
Again, my recollection is that we, at the Ottawa Police Service, started to consider a range of options, injunction being one of them, as mitigation options,
Yes.
post-incident response options. I don't know when the first communication would have went from the Ottawa Police Service to the city, and that might have predated that January 30th call with City Manager Steve Kanellakis, but I do recall that phone call with Steve Kanellakis, sir.
Right, and do you remember, I can put it up in front of you if you like, it's just a bit of bothersome, I'm hoping not to do it. Do you remember following up with him with an email just reciting your call and what you asked him, and he was then going to get back to you?
I don't have an independent recollection, sorry.
Okay, I don't need to put it up. But after you had that call, I take it that you had some ideas for the terms of what the injunction would look like if it was obtained, and you told him those things, I take it?
Again, there were very loose ideas at that point. We were still just trying to figure out what had landed in our city at that point.
Okay. And you then also provided Mr. Kay that the legal counsel, the internal legal counsel for OPS would assist with whatever evidence and whatever support they needed to obtain the injunction, correct?
I'd assigned my general counsel to lead that, and through her office, they would be the primary point of contact.
Right. And as a very senior police officer, you're aware that once you obtain an injunction, its terms can be enforced via the criminal code under section 127 if people don't follow its terms, right?
I don't have a lot of experience with injunctions, sir, and how they tie into the criminal code. I will take you at face value.
Right. But it's fair to say that if an injunction was obtained, it would add another tool to the toolbox for enforcement purposes. Fair?
It would add another tool well beyond enforcement.
Yeah.
But that would be the potential benefit, that in the net, there would be a net benefit to addressing whatever the public safety issue was.
Right. And in your testimony last week, I take it that you agreed with the evidence of Inspector Bondoin with respect to crowd dynamics. Do you remember saying that?
Actually, I don't remember saying exactly that. Yeah. So for context, Commissioner, I think Inspector Bondoin provided fantastic context in general around crowd dynamics and theory to the Commissioner, and I would encourage you to utilize that fully. The only place I might diverge somewhat from Inspector Bondoin, and I suspect if he had a chance to add clarity to my comment, I think we would find congruence. There were multiple crowds and therefore multiple crowd dynamics. So to describe the crowd within the red zone and then try to ascribe those dynamics to those in the neighborhoods, and then to describe those to the dynamics of those in the suburban parts of our city, you couldn't do that. The dynamics literally sometimes changed block by block. The dynamics of the morning crowds were different from the dynamics of the evening and overnight crowds. Weekend dynamics were different from weekdays. So I just would put one small C cautionary note on the otherwise excellent testimony of Inspector Bondoin, that it wasn't a crowd, and that crowd wasn't static over a 24-hour period.
Right. But in his evidence, and I think you're in agreement with this, Inspector Bondoin talked about what has been referred to as the 80-20 rule. Do you remember hearing that?
I'm not sure he said 80-20 rule, but I understand the breakdown of dynamic of percentages, rough percentages that he was using.
Right, and just to reiterate that, it's presumed that 80% of a crowd in a protest are law-abiding, is that right?
I think that's a general comment, yes.
And then the other 15% are what I would call on the fence. They could go either way, maybe they're influenced, but there's that 15% factor.
That's what he was describing, sir, yes.
Yeah, and then 5% are the troublemakers. That's how he sort of summarized it. So would you agree that that's sort of the general rule with crowd dynamics?
I'm not an expert in crowd dynamics. I'll rely on Inspector Baudouin's testimony.
So if an injunction was obtained, I take it, I know you were just spitballing ideas at the time, but I take it that two of the terms for that, the major terms, would have, of course, been that the trucks that were blocking roadways due to where they were parked would be removed. Would that be fair?
Sorry, can you just repeat?
So if an injunction was to be obtained, I take it that you would have been looking for two important points. And the first I'd put to you is that the trucks that were blocking roadways due to where they were parked would be removed. Is that fair?
Unfortunately, no, sir, and it's only in this context. Pursuing a city injunction that led to that, I would first need to know that I had a reasonable reliability on the resources necessary to execute such an injunction. And quite frankly, I think until, well, certainly past my last day in office, I didn't have those resources.
Right. And of course, the OPS simply cannot go out and get an injunction themselves either, can they? That the city does. Police officers and police services don't apply for injunctions. That's not happened.
That's correct, sir.
Right. And so it's fair to say that you were relying upon the city of Ottawa to obtain an injunction if one was going to be obtained.
Yes, sir.
Right. Now, I take it, though, if the city did go out and obtain an injunction, if the 80% rule was applied and that injunction was served on protesters, it's fair to say that some of them would have left after being served the injunction, right?
I think it's fair to say that, yes, some would see that as a reason, if they needed one, to leave at that point.
Absolutely. And so what I'd like to bring up now is OPS document OPS 00004927, please. So these are the type notes, and we went through some of the handwritten ones of somebody called CH previously, but these are the type notes of your meeting with Brenda Lucky as well as Commissioner Carrack from the OPP. So if you can just take a minute, I'm sure you've seen these. PS is you, is that fair?
Yes, sir.
Do you want to just review that for a minute?
Yes, please.
Madam Clerk, if you could, or Mr. Clerk, if you could scroll down to for me. Okay,
Sorry,
you can scroll.
just-
Yes.
One last line there. Oh. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So, and what I want to chat with you about is the points that say 4 ops. And there's 5 points there, but one's just commentary on the other 4. And so the 4 ops, which I will call the 4-pronged approach that you had pitched, was ongoing public order management, planning for long-term application, police-led intervention to arrest or bring to an end, and seek an injunction at all levels because of all 3 levels of land involved. So that's a multi-pronged, multi-tactic approach that would be very common in policing. Is that fair?
Yes, again, I think you said it, but just to be clear, it's not one or the other or the other, but
Right.
some combination of all 4.
Correct. Yeah. So it's a multifaceted approach because you don't use a sledgehammer to squash a mosquito, but you want to have all your tools that you can in place and use them as appropriate.
Yes, sir.
All right. So an injunction on, when you had this conversation on January 31st, was something that was a part of those 4 ops.
Yes, sir.
Right. Okay. Now, if we could scroll down, please. And I take it BL here, that's Commissioner Brenda Lucky, is that right?
I'll assume so. Yes, sir.
Right. So I'll give you a second to review those points.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. And so is that, those points first, are those accurate from what you recall from that conversation? From what she said?
They're accurate. I recall that the second bullet point around the injunction, that the commissioner at the time went into a lengthy explanation of her experience with and therefore position with injunctions, and it was clear that she was not, did not believe it was going to be a substantive part of the solution.
Right. And so here, she had told you, and then I believe Commissioner Carrick somewhat backed her up, but he was more on the fence, that she didn't think an injunction was a good idea.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
He was not as emphatic, but was not far off her overall theme.
Right. And so it's fair to say that at this point, this is the first time someone has told you not to go the injunction route. Is that right?
Again, I wouldn't use the language told. Neither commissioners directed me.
Right.
They provided their perspective.
Okay. But even after this meeting, I haven't seen anything in the records that you ever changed your advice or anything to the city. You still were in support of them getting an injunction if they wanted to do so, but it was up to them.
Agreed. Again, just with the almost the inevitable caveat that no matter what you do, whether it's a discussion around a declaration of state of emergency, an injunction, if we don't have the resources, it could be even more problematic.
Right. And so I then want to take you to another document, if I can. It's the one that my friends have been referring to, if I may, just a second. And that would be OPS 00014454. It's the long set of notes. And I'd like to go to page 24 of those notes. So just from my understanding too, sir, these notes in the disclosure package, they say they're from somebody called CH. Do you know who that is?
That's General Counsel Christiane Huneau.
Okay, thank you. And so she's the general counsel to the OPS?
That's correct, sir.
All right. So if we can scroll down. So these are from February 2nd, and it's a meeting that all of you had. And there it says, Steve K had a meeting with the federal government today. And at the bottom, it says, not likely an injunction. So from your recollection of that meeting, did Steve K tell you that the feds told him not to get an injunction? Or whoever was representing Steve K at this meeting?
Yeah, thank you. I want to be very careful because I think I've suffered somewhat from this, trying to interpret other people's language from somebody else. So I want to be very careful on this. This is the 2nd of February, so
Yes.
this would have been the first time that City Manager Steve Kanellakis advised me that he'd been participating what I call tri-level calls.
Right.
Federal government, provincial government, municipal government. And he gave me a very quick overview of the one or more calls that he had been on. And that's my best recollection of his very brief overview. So I wouldn't want to ascribe anything particular to the federal government based on this line in this document.
So do you remember, can we scroll up too, just so you can see the date and who was there? So it doesn't look like Steve Bell was present.
No, so it's myself, Christiane Huneau, John Steinbach, who's the Executive Director of Strategy and Communications. The rest are from 2 external service providers.
Right. And do you know who was making the statements with respect to Steve Bell's meeting with the feds that are at points 1, 2, 3, and 4? Do you recall?
That would be me providing that briefing to the group.
Okay.
And that's Steve Kanellakis, not Steve Bell.
Or Steve, my apologies, there's so many names. So Steve Kay had told you at another point in time before this meeting that he was not likely going to go the injunction route.
That he was on meetings, tri-level meetings, in which the topic of an injunction was raised, and that's my best recollection of his best recollection.
Okay, all right. So outside of injunction, I just want to talk to you about sort of protests generally and how they work. And I'm not going to be asking you questions a lot. This isn't an exam, but I just went through this with Commissioner Carrerick, and I think it's important to go through with you as well. Can you agree that in sort of general protest law and enforcement and criminal offenses regarding the same, you basically have three types? You have lawful protest, which is protected under the charter. Then you have an unlawful assembly, and then you have a riot. Can you agree with that?
Under the law, if you're asking if that's the definitions under the law, I will cede to you. Under policing, we would talk about peaceful, peaceful lawful, peaceful unlawful, unlawful, and there'd be a range of other. But from a definition, legal definition perspective, I will leave that to your analysis.
Right, and you're aware, of course, with protests that when they cross the Rubicon between lawful protest and unlawful protest, it becomes a criminal matter under Section 63 of the Criminal Code.
I am not as conversant with the code. Again,
Okay.
I will trust your interpretation.
Right, and so with that, is it fair to say that the OPS and your office at no time prior to the declaration issued any form of formal notice to the protesters that they had been deemed to be an unlawful assembly and they must disperse?
That's correct, sir.
So no time that didn't happen?
Not to my understanding.
Right. So you're aware also of the riot provisions in the Criminal Code for the Riot Act?
I am, sir, yes.
Right. And so that requires that even if a general riot isn't happening, as recognized in law without the declaration, that if a sheriff, a mayor, or a justice of the peace or judge of the Ontario Court of Justice goes out, says this set of words that end in God save the Queen, or now God save the King, and it's then deemed an illegal gathering and people are ordered to disperse. You agree that's what that does?
Yes, sir. Sorry, I'm just,
So
when it was written, it was probably in an age where people might hear those words.
Exactly.
Everybody in the area would hear those words. Yes.
Right. And so there was never a declaration, of course, as a riot, and there was no formal declaration that there was an unlawful assembly. And therefore, the protesters who were there, who were sitting there, no one in authority, it's fair to say, told them that they were doing anything illegal. Is that fair?
Again, I will cede to the legal definition of it, but I couldn't agree that that would be the case given the massive amount of social media, mainstream media coverage of what was happening in our city here and across the country. I think it'd be very hard to believe that any individual could not understand that there was a level of unlawfulness and public danger and risk, heightened risk, at any point from January 29th onwards.
Right. And so that brings me, interestingly enough, to my next area. And I heard your evidence or read your evidence about misinformation. And it's fair to say that on social media in particularly, and even in the news, there was a whole bunch of misinformation about the protesters. Is that fair?
About everything that
About
had to do with it, yes.
Right. So for example, there was reports in the news that there was an arson committed by the protesters, and I understand that was investigated, and it turned out that wasn't true.
Yes, sir.
And there.
Sorry,
Yeah.
the investigation was concluded after I left office.
Yes.
My yes, sir, is what I understood to be in the media, but not from the actual investigators themselves.
Okay. And with the misinformation, did you have any idea about how the misinformation about the protests started? Did you do any analysis with your intelligence bureau on that?
No, sir.
Okay.
Not that I'm aware of. They may have made such attempts, but I wasn't aware.
All right. So I want to bring up a document. I gave notice of this earlier today, and I don't know if the feds are going to object, but I wouldn't be surprised. If I could bring up document ssm.can dot 00007722 underscore rel dot 0001. All right, so what this is, sir, this is a text message from a fellow by the name of Alexander Cohen. Are you familiar with him?
It does ring a bell, sir.
Okay. He's with Minister Marciano's office, Minister of Public Safety, and it's between him and Mary Liz Power. Are you familiar with Mary Liz Power?
Again, the names aren't ringing a bell.
Okay. She's with the Prime Minister's office. So I'm just going to read that to you for you so you have an understanding. And this is from about the 24th, on or before the 24th of January. And it says, I got a quick response. People are into it. Let me know if your boss is too. Happy to help however I can. This is what I sent through, though, by the way. Hi, I just had a chat with Alex at PS, meaning Public Safety, who had a bit of an interesting idea. As you saw in the pod goals chat, the truckers' convoy and some of their more extreme comments in brackets, i.e. calling for a January 6-style insurrection, close brackets, are getting more coverage in the media. Alex was surveying whether there'd be interest in his boss doing some media on this eventually. He was chatting with Mediciano about it right before he went into the cabinet retreat. Now, I can tell you the cabinet retreat was on the 24th. That's how I know it was before the 24th. I think there could be an opportunity to get in on this growing narrative of the truckers, particularly with the research that LRB is doing into their backers. My thoughts of the framing here would be similar to what PM/Blair, meaning the Prime Minister and Minister Blair, said last year when January 6 occurred. And the first thing is, our democracy is something we need to nurture and protect every day. Now, that text message then continues, and I'd ask Mr. Clark if you could bring up ssm.can.00007722 underscore rel dot 0001.
Council, I think that's the current document we're on.
Sorry, 2716. Nope, I apologize. Hold on. Well, I've got the name of it wrong. I think I got the wrong number. I emailed it to you earlier. If you could open it up, it's text message 2. It just says text 2.
I have a text to pbcan 0001527 underscore route.
We can see if that works. I'll let you know if it's the right one.
It looks to be a text from someone named Pam.
No, it's not. I can forward it to you again here. I've just sent it.
I think that's why it's good to have these things done in advance and not last minute.
True.
Mr. Clerk, it's Eric Brousseau. I think I've opened the document that my friend, I think, sent you, and I think it's 7724 would be the second text message that he's trying to refer to.
All right, so this is the continuation, and it's what sort of the lines are going to be. And we will always support the right to peaceful protest. Some of the call that organizers of these events are making are concerning, and we're taking them seriously. In brackets, would need something to back this up, close brackets. We'll continue to monitor the situation closely. The fine line to walk would be to ensure we are not looking like we're directing the police, which obviously is not the goal here. hoping to canvass your thoughts. Alex said he'd come back to me with a proposal this afternoon when he gets to chat with Mediciano again, and obviously pending his boss and our interest in looking into this further. And if you could scroll down. And Alex responds, thanks. I had an initial chat with my boss and he's supportive, but wants to wait a day or two. There's a danger that if we come down too hard, they might push out the crazies. And then the response, I think that's fair. Apparently Global and others are working on stories. Maybe see how those land. So when I show you this, and after this, the exact same sort of narrative came out from the federal government following these suggestions from their staff. Is that misinformation?
I'm sorry, I can't really comment. There's just not enough context to know who these people are, what they represent, what information or influence they have.
Right. Okay. Well, and then just moving on to a last area I'd like to question you about, and this is sort of on the fly. I sat here and listened to the evidence with respect to the notes that Deputy Chief Ferguson took. And all of those notes were about you. Now, I've only been doing this for 12 years, but I've never seen anything like that with officers keeping notes on one another. Can you explain to me how odd that is, or would you like to elaborate on that? Because to me, officers keep notes on an investigation. They don't keep notes on their chief, and they don't keep notes on their colleagues. It's for investigative purposes. Do you have any concern with what happened there?
In my 30 years in policing, I've never seen anything like that myself.
Anything else?
Well, I think my evidence commissioner is that her extreme editorial license that she took was extremely problematic for me and reflects on her, not on me.
Mm-hmm. And would you agree that it's in police training that officers are taught to make notes, and whatever they write is, for court or for proceedings typically, and it goes and it's used, if you don't have something in your notes, it goes against your credibility, and if you do, it supports your credibility. You're probably familiar with that.
Except for the last part.
Yeah.
My understanding is that notes are evidentiary. They are produced for the purpose of judicial processes as well as for internal system and policy requirements. But
And you'd agree just because someone writes something in their notes doesn't mean it's true, does it?
they are supposed to be an honest representation,
But sometimes they're not.
clearly in some cases.
Thank you.